For 1,000 years, Constantinople's walls stood invincible, until a cannon the size of a dragon arrived in 1453. The three-layered 60-foot-high Theodosian walls were the ancient world's ultimate defense. Ottoman bronze hurled 600-pound stone balls, cracking masonry like eggshells. Yet each night, defenders patched the breaches and the city held. So what finally broke through? Some say a small gate was left unlocked. Others whisper of treachery. The truth is stranger than both. Uncover the real story of the breach that ended Rome. It is a story that has been told and retold for centuries, but rarely do we look beyond the simple narrative of triumph and tragedy. To truly grasp what happened in 1453, we must first paint a picture of the world that led to that fateful spring. The Byzantine Empire, once the glittering heir to Rome, had been reduced to a pathetic rump state. 1,000 years earlier, its legions had stretched from the Euphrates to the Straits of Gibraltar. Now, all that remained was Constantinople itself, a few Aegean islands, and the desolate Moria in southern Greece. The imperial treasury was empty, the population had plummeted, and the army numbered just a few thousand. The city that had once housed 500,000 souls now held barely 50,000, many of them living among the ruins of former grandeur. Whole neighborhoods within the massive circuit of the walls had reverted to farmland, orchards, and wilderness. Sheep grazed where senators once debated, and the grand forums echoed with loneliness. The imperial palace of Blackshirney, once glittering with gold mosaics, now had missing roof tiles and drafty halls. The Byzantine gold coin, the hyperpyron, was so debased it was worth a fraction of its former value. Yet, for all its weakness, Constantinople remained a symbol, the new Rome, the golden city on the Bosporus, the crossroads of Europe and Asia. Its fall would change the world. The political landscape of Christendom only deepened its isolation. Decades earlier, the Byzantine emperors had desperately sought union with the Roman Catholic Church, hoping for military aid. At the Council of Florence in 1439, they signed a decree of reunion, but it was violently rejected by the Orthodox clergy and populace in Constantinople. The infamous cry arose, "Better the Sultan's turban than the Pope's tiara." When Constantine XI, the last emperor, publicly proclaimed the Union in 1452 to appease the West, riots erupted in the streets. The empire was not just physically weak, it was spiritually fractured. Constantine's desperate union was seen as a betrayal of orthodoxy, and the anti-unionist leader Gennadios Scholarios, a monk, publicly declared that the fall would be divine punishment. The Pope did send a small aid package, but it was too little, too late. The West's apathy was partly because many saw the Byzantines as schismatics, not fellow Christians. Meanwhile, Western Europe was consumed by its own conflicts, the 100 Years' War, Italian city-state rivalries, and the apathy of distant powers. Promises of crusades evaporated. A few Genoese and Venetian adventurers came, but no king. The city was abandoned. The story of that fall begins not in Constantinople, but in the heart of the rising Ottoman state. Sultan Mehmed I was just 21 years old in 4043, but his ambition was ancient. He had ascended the Ottoman throne for the second time in 1451, and from that moment his eyes were fixed on the city that had eluded his forebears. Previous sultans had tried and failed. His own father Murad II had besieged Constantinople as recently as 1422, but withdrew under mysterious circumstances. Mehmed was determined to succeed. His proper ever PS, he was a complex figure, a scholar fluent in multiple languages including Arabic, Persian, Latin, and Greek, a lover of philosophy and poetry, and a ruthless conqueror who could order mass executions without flinching. He revered Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar, and saw himself as their successor. For him, Constantinople was not just a strategic objective, it was a personal obsession. He kept a map of the city pinned to his wall and would spend hours tracing the walls, planning his attack. His closest advisors thought him foolish, but he had a vision: Constantinople as the new capital of an Islamic world empire. He called himself the Sword of Rome, and he intended to plunge it into the heart of Byzantium. Mehmed's strategic genius lay in methodical preparation. He studied every failed siege of the past, pored over maps of the city's defenses, and consulted with Western renegades who had served in Byzantine armies. He learned from his father's failed siege in 1422, when the Ottomans lacked a navy to blockade the Golden Horn. This time, he would not make that mistake. He knew that control of the sea was critical, so he began building a massive fleet. He also recognized the need for diplomatic isolation. He secured treaties with Venice and Hungary, neutralized potential threats from the Karamanids, and sent envoys to pacify the Balkan princes. Every move was a chess piece toward his ultimate goal. In the months leading up to the siege, Mehmed tightened the noose around Constantinople. In the summer of 1452, he constructed a fortress on the European shore of the Bosporus, just a few miles north of the city. Called Rumeli Hazura, or the Throat Cutter, it was built in an astonishing 4 months, its massive towers overlooking the narrowest point of the strait. Mehmed personally designed the layout, linking 3 great towers with curtain walls, and 6,000 workmen toiled under his direct supervision. Paired with an older fortress on the Asian side, it gave the Ottomans complete control over maritime traffic. No ship could now pass without permission, effectively strangling Constantinople's supply lines from the Black Sea. Grain shipments from Crimea ceased, and bread prices soared inside the city. When a Venetian vessel tried to run the blockade, it was sunk by cannon fire, and its crew were captured and impaled as a warning. The message was clear: Mehmed would brook no interference. Inside Constantinople, the mood darkened. The Byzantines could only watch from their walls as the Ottoman grip tightened. But how could such a reduced empire withstand the full might of the Ottomans? The answer lay in the city's ancient defenses. The Theodosian walls were a marvel of military engineering, a triple line of fortification consisting of a moat 20 yards wide, an outer wall with its own towers, and a higher inner wall studded with towers every 50 yards. For 1,000 years, they had repelled waves of attackers: Attila the Hun, the Avars, the Arabs, the Bulgars. Each assault had shattered against this stone bulwark, but by 1443, centuries of neglect had taken their toll. The moat was silted, the outer terraces overgrown, and many towers cracked by earthquakes. The garrison, pathetically small, could not man the full 5-mile circuit. Many of the wall's stonework had been crudely repaired with rubble and mud, and the tall towers, which should have held archers and catapults, were often empty or manned by civilians with no combat training. Gunpowder weapons were still new to the Byzantines. They had a few small cannons, but they lacked the shot and powder to use them effectively. Emperor Constantine, a melancholy and deeply dutiful man, did what he could. He ordered stocks of timber, stones, and barrels of earth to be piled near the walls for nightly repairs, and he distributed all able-bodied citizens, monks, merchants, even women, to different sectors. Yet the truth was grim. The world's greatest fortifications were now held by a skeleton force. Mehmed's secret weapon was the creation of a Hungarian engineer named Orban. Orban had first approached the Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI, offering his services to cast a great cannon. But the emperor, his treasury bear, could not afford him. Constantine could offer only a meager stipend, and Orban, seeing greater opportunity, slipped away to the Ottoman court. There he was received by Mehmed, who showered him with gold and asked if he could make a cannon powerful enough to breach the walls of Constantinople. According to the chronicles, Orban boasted that his cannon could destroy the walls of Babylon itself. Mehmed gave him everything he needed. Foundries were set up in Edirne, the Ottoman capital, and work began to cast a bronze colossus. The process was immense and dangerous. Huge furnaces roared for days to melt the copper and tin, while workers dug a massive pit to hold the clay mold. The first attempt cracked, but in the end, a barrel over 27 feet long emerged, with a bore of nearly 30 inches. Its mouth could swallow a man. It fired stone balls weighing 600 pounds. Transporting this behemoth required a team of 60 oxen and hundreds of men who leveled roads, built log bridges over streams, and greased the way with olive oil. The great gun sank in mud frequently, and progress was a glacial 2.5 miles a day. Its test firing, witnessed by Mehmed, sent a shockwave for miles and caused expectant mothers in the city to miscarry, or so the legends say. Orban himself supervised the emplacement, calculating the optimal distance and angle. The Great Bombard, alongside other smaller cannons, was arranged in batteries, with one battery of 4 large cannons targeting the gate of St. Romanus. The noise of the firing was so immense that it could be heard for miles, and the defenders would cover their ears and pray. By April, it was in place before the walls of Constantinople, along with dozens of smaller cannons. The earth shook with its arrival. And so, on April 6, 1530, the siege began. The Ottoman forces fanned out around the land walls, a seemingly endless sea of tents and soldiers. Estimates of their numbers vary wildly, but it is likely that Mehmed commanded around 80,000 men, including the elite janissaries, thousands of irregulars, and a large fleet. Mehmed, ever the strategist, positioned himself opposite the Mesotetian, the central section of the walls where the terrain was weakest. Here, in the valley of the Lycus River, the fortifications were lower and more vulnerable. It was here that he would concentrate his cannonade. The defenders, led by the 49-year-old Emperor Constantine XI, took their positions on the ramparts. Constantine was a man of deep melancholy and profound duty. He had spent years trying to patch the crumbling edifice of his empire, seeking alliances in the west, but to little avail. Now he was the last Roman emperor, and he was determined to die in the imperial purple. His fighting force numbered no more than 7,000, a pitiful fraction of the Ottoman host. Among them were many foreign volunteers, Genoese soldiers under the skilled commander Giovanni Giustiniani, who brought 700 men at his own expense, Venetians, who had a commercial stake in the city, and a motley collection of Catalans, Cretans, and others who had chosen to make a stand. An unlikely alliance of Greek Orthodox and Latin Catholic, united by desperation. The first task for the defenders was to protect their maritime flank. The Golden Horn, a narrow inlet of the Bosporus, formed Constantinople's northern boundary. To prevent Ottoman ships from entering, the Byzantines stretched a massive iron chain across its mouth, from the city walls to the Galata Tower on the opposite shore. Each link, forged by the city's blacksmiths from scrap iron and old anchors, was the length of a man's arm. The chain floated on wooden buoys and weighed several tons, a testament to the ingenuity born of desperation. Behind it, the ships waited, their decks crowded with marines. But the sea walls built for a different era were low and poorly maintained in places, and they had never faced sustained artillery attack. Constantine posted his most reliable men there, but every sailor taken from the land walls was one less to face the cannonade. Behind that chain, the Byzantine and Allied fleet waited, some 26 ships, mostly galleys, their crews ready to repel boarders. It was an effective barrier, but it also meant that the defenders had to guard the entire length of the sea walls, thinning their already meager forces. Constantine stationed the best troops on the land walls, while the sea walls were entrusted to reserves and even monks. The Genoese colony of Galata, just across the Horn, maintained a precarious neutrality, secretly aiding both sides while trying to avoid the Sultan's wrath. Could the walls hold against the new technology? For the first 10 days, the Ottoman cannons hammered the land walls. Orban's great gun could fire only about 7 times a day. Its barrel needed constant cooling with olive oil to prevent cracking, but each shot was devastating. The stone balls, flying at immense speed, smashed into the brick and limestone, gouging out huge chunks. The impact could be felt throughout the city, a rolling thunder that shook the ground and shattered windows. When a ball struck, it sent up clouds of dust and debris, and the defenders would scramble to assess the damage. The great gun was temperamental, though. It had to be repositioned after each shot, and its accuracy was poor. The recoil would sometimes splinter its wooden cradle, forcing crews to make repairs under fire. But its psychological effect was immense. The defenders worked frantically through the night, hauling up timber, stones, and barrels of earth to fill the breaches. They hung bales of hay and wool over the ramparts to absorb some of the shock. It was a desperate, exhausting cycle, days of terror and destruction, nights of feverish repair. Yet, despite the ceaseless bombardment, the walls held. The first several Ottoman assaults on April 18 were repulsed with heavy losses. Giustiniani's Genoese, armed with crossbows and manning the critical point, proved their worth. The ancient defenses seemed, for a moment, to be once again too strong. But Mehmed was not a sultan to rely on brute force alone. When a direct attack failed to crack the city, he devised a stroke of tactical genius that changed everything. The Golden Horn, protected by the chain, had become a safe haven for the defenders' fleet and a frustrating barrier for the Ottomans. The Ottoman Navy had tried to force the chain on April 12 and failed, suffering losses. Now, Mehmed conceived a plan to bypass the chain entirely, not by breaking it, but by simply going over the land. In a remarkable feat of engineering, he ordered his men to construct a paved road of greased logs over the hill behind Galata, from the Bosporus shore to the Golden Horn. The ships, cradled on wooden rollers, were hauled by teams of oxen and men over a distance of nearly 2 miles and a hill 200 feet high. Then, on the night of April 22, under cover of darkness and to the sound of drums and trumpets to mask the noise, they dragged some 70 ships out of the water, hauled them over the hill, and launched them into the Golden Horn behind the chain. By dawn, the Byzantine defenders woke to the unbelievable sight of Ottoman warships riding at anchor in their supposedly safe harbor, pennants flying, drums beating, and soldiers jeering. It was a masterstroke, a psychological blow, as well as a military one. The transport of the ships is still regarded as one of the greatest feats of military logistics in medieval warfare. It demonstrated Mehmed's audacity and his willingness to defy the conventional limits of warfare. The defenders could only watch in disbelief, their last hope of naval superiority dashed. Now Constantinople was effectively blockaded on all sides. The defenders had to stretch their limited manpower even further to protect the sea walls along the Horn. The noose was tightening. To counter this, the defenders attempted a desperate night attack on April 28, sending fire ships to burn the Ottoman vessels in the Horn, but the attack was betrayed and failed with heavy losses. The Ottomans captured Christian sailors in full view of the city walls, and the Byzantines reciprocated by executing Ottoman prisoners on the ramparts. The siege had turned into a brutal, no-quarter struggle. With the city now completely surrounded, what kept the defenders going? Inside Constantinople, daily life became a waking nightmare. Cannon fire echoed day and night, shaking the walls and fraying nerves. The air stank of smoke, decay, and fear. Food supplies ran dangerously low, and bread was strictly rationed. Food became so scarce that the only bread available was made from millet and tasted of must. The cisterns, those vast underground water reservoirs, still held fresh water, but the distribution was perilous. Children cried in the night, and the elderly sat in doorways, stunned. Yet, amid the despair, there were small acts of defiance: a baker who kept his oven going until the wood ran out, a nun who dressed wounds with strips torn from her own habit. Families huddled in cellars or gathered in churches where monks chanted ceaseless prayers. Women and children carried water and stones to the ramparts, working alongside soldiers. At night, bonfires lit the battlements as repair crews labored under the flickering light, their shadows dancing on the broken masonry. Constantine moved through the defenders, offering words of encouragement and overseeing the distribution of the last provisions. Religious processions wound through the ancient streets, icons held high, but despair was setting in. Rumors and omens multiplied. On May 24, a lunar eclipse plunged the city into a blood-red darkness which many interpreted as a sign of divine abandonment. A few days later, during a solemn procession, the most revered icon of the Virgin Mary slipped from its platform and fell into the mud, an incident that caused widespread weeping. Strange lights and mists were seen over the dome of Hagia Sophia. Some whispered the Holy Spirit had departed. The people's faith wavered. Outside the walls, Mehmed faced his own problems. His army, though vast, was impatient. The Janissaries, in particular, expected rapid conquest and rich rewards. Summer heat and disease were taking a toll, and some of his advisors, including the Grand Vizier Halil Pasha, who had always opposed the campaign, fearing it would unite the Christian West, urged him to lift the siege. But Mehmed was resolute. He rallied his troops with promises of great plunder and prepared for a final, all-out assault. He sent word to Constantine's surrender, and the emperor could leave the city with his possessions and his people unharmed. Constantine's response was defiant. He would not surrender the city. He would die defending it. As May wore on, the bombardment intensified, and the assaults became more frequent. The walls, once proud and seamless, now resembled a battered ruin, patched with wooden palisades, earthworks, and piles of rubble. The moat had been largely filled in with debris, making it easier for attackers to reach the walls. On May 18, the Ottomans launched a massive assault with a huge siege tower, but the defenders, led by Justiniani, managed to set it on fire and repelled the attackers, inflicting heavy casualties. Yet the city was bleeding. The defenders were exhausted, many wounded, and ammunition was running short. A small Mongol ship, which had managed to sneak through the blockade, brought news that no relief fleet was coming. The Venetian flotilla promised by the West had never sailed. The last embers of hope were extinguished. Constantine, it is said, made his peace with God, confessing his sins and receiving communion in Hagia Sophia, and prepared for the end. The same night, a rumor spread that a relief fleet was sighted, but it was a trick of the moonlight. The city spent its last hours in prayer, with churches staying open all night. Constantine addressed his commanders and nobles, declaring that they were fighting for their faith, their families, and the empire that had stood for over 1,000 years. He wept, and many wept with him. And so we come to the final decisive question: what would finally break the stalemate? The final assault was set for the early hours of Tuesday, May 29, 45 at 3. The night before, the city was shrouded in an eerie silence, broken only by prayers. Mehmed gave a rousing speech to his troops, reminding them of the riches of the city and the pleasures of paradise. He deployed his forces in 3 waves. The first wave consisted of irregulars, the Bashibasuks, who were poorly armed, but numerous thousands of them. Their purpose was simply to tire the defenders and use up their ammunition. The second wave was the more disciplined Anatolian infantry, well-armored and determined. And the third, the Sultan's own Janissaries, fresh and ruthless, the elite of the Ottoman army, would deliver the killing blow. The assault began just after midnight. The night was dark, but the Ottoman camp was ablaze with torches and war lamps, and the din of drums, trumpets, and shouting filled the air. The irregulars surged forward, their cries echoing across the dark plain, scrambling over the filled moat and up the rubble slopes. The defenders, manning the walls and the makeshift stockades, fought back with every weapon at their disposal: arrows, stones, jars of Greek fire that burst into liquid flame on impact. The first wave was beaten back after 2 hours of brutal close combat, but not before exhausting the defenders and depleting their missiles. Then came the Anatolians, more organized and pressing fiercely at the central breach. But Constantine and Justiniani rallied the defenders, and again the Ottomans were thrown back. For a moment, in the gray pre-dawn light, It seemed that another miracle might occur, that Constantinople might once again defy the odds. But then fate intervened in the cruelest of ways. Giovanni Giustiniani, the rock upon whom the defense rested, was gravely wounded. A crossbow bolt or a bullet, sources disagree, struck him in the chest or leg, piercing his armor. With the wound, a deep puncture, was bleeding profusely. He cried out in agony, and his men rushed to him. Despite Constantine's desperate pleas, "Brother, stay with me. The fight needs you." Giustiniani's Genoese carried him from the walls toward a waiting ship in the harbor. As Giustiniani was carried down, many of his men lost heart and followed, tearing a gap in the defense at the critical Lycus Valley. Constantine, seeing them go, shouted after them, but it was too late. The collapse began. The sight of their commander retreating sent a wave of panic through the other defenders. Many began to flee, abandoning their posts. Constantine, seeing the line waver, is said to have cried out in anguish, "The city is lost, but I live." He cast off his imperial regalia, purple cloak and crown, so that he could not be identified, drew his sword, and plunged into the fight alongside his remaining bodyguards, determined to die as a common soldier in the breach. Now the Janissaries, seeing the confusion, charged with a terrifying discipline, their ranks steady despite the carnage. They surged through the breach, overwhelming the exhausted defenders. And then came the moment that has been debated for centuries, the story of the Kirkoporta. In the chaos, a small postern gate in the Blaschernae section of the walls, the Kirkoporta, was allegedly left open after a sortie. Some chronicles claim that a group of defenders had sallied out earlier and failed to lock it properly. Ottoman soldiers noticed the open gate, slipped through, climbed the tower, and raised the Ottoman banner. Whether this was the decisive moment or simply a contributing factor, the result was the same. Panic spread among the defenders. Cries of "the city is taken" rose up, and the last resistance crumbled. The great city of Constantine, the bastion of Christendom in the east, fell to the Turks. Emperor Constantine C, the last Roman emperor, vanished in the melee. His body was never positively identified. Some say he was cut down while fighting heroically. Others suggest he was trampled in the chaos. The uncertainty gave rise to the enduring legend that he had been rescued by an angel, turned to stone, and hidden in a cave beneath the Golden Gate, to one day return and reclaim his city. The everything poor text was that the empire he had sworn to defend was no more. By morning, Mehmed rode through the shattered gate of St. Romanus and into his new capital, surveying the corpses and smoking ruins. He made his way to the Hagia Sophia, the magnificent church built by Emperor Justinian, the spiritual heart of Orthodox Christianity for nearly 1,000 years. There, he found a crowd of terrified civilians who had taken refuge, praying for a miracle. Mehmed stopped the Christian liturgy and declared the building a mosque, an act that symbolized the transformation of the city. A cleric climbed to the pulpit and recited the Islamic creed, and the great golden mosaics of Christ and the saints were eventually plastered over, their eyes to be hidden for centuries. The Sultan then gave his army the traditional 3 days of plunder, during which the city was stripped of its treasures, its libraries, its icons. Thousands of civilians were massacred or enslaved. The streets ran with blood. The imperial library, with its priceless manuscripts, was largely destroyed, though Mehmed himself is said to have saved some volumes. But Mehmed, ever the visionary, soon put a stop to the uncontrolled destruction. He intended Constantinople to be the jewel of his empire, and he began to rebuild and repopulate it. He granted privileges to the remaining Greek population, re-established the Orthodox Patriarchate under his control, and invited Jews and Armenians to settle. The transformation was not instantaneous, it took decades. Mehmed brought in Muslim and Jewish artisans, repaired aqueducts, and built a new palace. The Greek population slowly recovered, though never to its former numbers, and the city became a vibrant hub of trade once more. The city, soon to be called Istanbul, would rise again, not as a Christian capital, but as an Islamic one. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves through Europe. The last vestige of the Roman Empire, was gone, and the Ottoman Turks now stood at the gates of the West. But the consequences were far more profound than mere territorial loss. In an unintended consequence, the fall sparked a cultural revolution. Greek scholars, fleeing the ruined city with whatever they could carry, brought with them precious manuscripts of ancient Greek and Roman text works of Plato, Aristotle, Homer, and others that had been lost to the West for centuries. These exiles found their way to Italy, to cities like Venice, Florence, and Rome, where their knowledge and teachings helped fuel the intellectual explosion of the Renaissance. They taught Greek to eager Italians, founded the Platonic Academy in Florence, and their lectures sparked a new humanism. The invention of the printing press, which emerged around the same time, spread these ideas like wildfire, and the world was never the same. In a strange twist of history, the death of Constantinople gave birth to a new age of discovery and enlightenment. The traditional trade routes to the east were now under Ottoman control, and European powers, previously reliant on Venetian intermediaries, were forced to seek alternative sea routes. This push directly led to the Age of Exploration. Vasco da Gama rounded Africa, and Columbus, carrying a map influenced by Ptolemaic knowledge preserved in Constantinople, sailed westward. The maps and navigational knowledge that the Ottomans now controlled set the stage for a new global era. The fall also had a profound psychological impact. The West realized it was vulnerable, and the medieval concept of a united Christendom under the Pope was shattered. The Ottoman threat would loom over Europe for centuries, leading to a series of wars and alliances that reshaped the continent. For the Ottoman Empire, the conquest was the beginning of a golden age. Mehmed, now known as Fatih, the Conqueror, had fulfilled an ancient Islamic prophecy of taking Constantinople. He rebuilt the city into a cosmopolitan capital, constructing mosques, markets, and public baths. He transformed the Hagia Sophia into a mosque, built the Grand Bazaar, and laid the foundations for an empire that would last for centuries, spanning 3 continents. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably from the old medieval world toward a new, more interconnected globe. The fall also fractured Christendom further. The Orthodox world saw the betrayal of the West, and the Pope's inability to send aid sealed a schism that persists today. And so, the breach that ended Rome was not a simple tale of a forgotten gate or a single act of betrayal. It was the culmination of a perfect storm, a dying empire, a rising sultan, and a revolutionary weapon that shattered the illusion of invincibility. The walls that had defied Attila the Hun and the Arab caliphates could not withstand the thunder of Orban's cannon. The truth is that Constantinople fell because history demanded it, the relentless march of technology, ambition, and change. The old world was giving way to the new, and on that spring morning in 1453, the echoes of the past were silenced forever. Yet the city itself did not die. It merely changed its name and its faith, continuing its eternal watch over the straits that divide continents. And if you walk its ancient streets today, past the remnants of the Theodosian walls still standing in crumbling majesty, you can still feel the weight of that moment, the moment when the dragon came and Rome finally breathed its last.